Hello everybody and welcome to Malts and Meeples. My name is Petter and today we're going to be talking about Edgeguard from Mangy Goblin Games. I actually reached out to them to be able to cover this Kickstarter, which is coming up, well, by the time you're seeing this, probably today on April 26th. Double check that date, but yes, April 26th. Edgeguard is going to be a dungeon crawl style game with RPG elements to it, where you level up your character, you can multi-class, and increase your stats to become a stronger character of your choice. Get more gear, everything you would expect for an RPG, but then also on the tabletop. So, let's talk a little bit about how this game works. Like I said, this is going to be an RPG style experience, but the big focus of the game is going to be those dungeon crawl scenarios that you go on. Those dungeon crawls are going to be where you find a lot of the story, fight monsters, get loot, crafting items, whatever it might be, get treasures, and get points to level up your character. Edgeguard takes some of the more common fantasy role-playing game character archetypes and allows you to play at them. You have a rogue, you have a caster, a healer, a ranger, and a fighter, though I might not have all of those names quite right, but that's the general idea of what those characters are going to do. Then you take those characters, build them up by getting them gear, potions, more cards to use in the game, and go out into a dungeon. On the way to that dungeon, you're going to have a random encounter. That might be a little bit of a fight, maybe fighting off some critters of some sort, a bandit who's trying to mug you, whatever it might be. And then you go into the dungeon, and that's where the meat of the game is going to be. Each character has stats for power or constitution and other stats as well. Charm, which gets you a discount at stores. And you use those different skills. Some of them determine health, some of them determine kind of these action points you can use for cards. And using your unique hand of cards, as well as the basic abilities you can do, you can always attack, you always can move, you can interact with objects, those things. You're going to crawl through a multi-room dungeon, clearing each room as you go until you reach the end. And as you're doing that and coming up upon a new room, every time you do that, you come across more story. What do you encounter? And it gives you that description that keeps you immersed as you dive further and further into the dungeons and into the story. And like a true good RPG, there are ways to critically succeed. So each class has its own die, and these dice seem to more be specific to one of the 5 different characters you can play, with blank sides that are not necessarily failures, it's just a regular attack, and then a critical success side. On a critical success side, Edgeguard does a nice job of keeping it simple for what you're going to do. Additionally, in some games, you might be rolling multiple dice then to see how much damage you do, multiplying it. And, I mean, you still have to do a little bit of multiplication here, but you're doing 1.5 times your normal amount of damage. Of course, the enemies can get critical successes against you as well, and that's where they start to become really scary. So, for example, in the tutorial scenario that I played, there is a Shadow Assassin. The Shadow Assassin, they can hit some, but without others ganging up on you, you're probably not going to take too much damage. However, if the Shadow Assassin gets a critical success, you roll a die to see what special ability they use. And one of the special abilities is roll that die for that critical success again. If you get another critical success, immediately drop the character who is being attacked, their hit points to 1. And normally an attack, and why it's not that scary unless you're being ganged up on, is that, well, the Shadow Assassin only hits for a couple points of damage. The mage type character that I was playing, they had a resistance of 4. So 2 damage against a resistance of 4. I block all the incoming damage. Now I get attacked by another person that round, and I take additional damage. My resistance doesn't go back up. So you need to be swarmed in that situation. But if you get that third ability on you, and you get hit once with that, you're down to 1 hit point. And I really appreciate that about the game, because it makes it feel a little bit different. It does a good job of keeping the combat simple while still keeping interesting things happening around you. It isn't just that you're rolling a die, it deals extra damage. For the monsters, for the bad guys, they can roll, it's a crit, and now something different is going to happen. Their behavior is going to change, and it's probably not going to be for the better. But for the characters, you roll that crit, it's just extra damage. Except, as a character, you have all sorts of different abilities that make up this hand of cards you can start with at the beginning of combat. And you take a card, you play that down. Now that's going to be done instead of your attack, but it might be even a better attack. For example, with my mage again, I was able to blast out in a straight line and hit everybody in that row or in that column. And that deals more damage. Like, yeah, I wouldn't necessarily be using that all the time, but it's a nice, strong ability. I also have the ability to teleport anywhere in a room. But everything that you're doing with that, that's costing you resources, and you have a limited number of resources to play out cards or get cards back into your hand. And then once you're out, and you're stuck doing your basic things, which might be pretty good still, but when you have 4 enemies closing in on you, sometimes it's nice to have that big hit that you can dish out. So that's just a few of my initial thoughts here on Edgeguard. This looks like it is going to be a big, fantastic game. I don't know everything they have planned for this Kickstarter. I'm going to be very interested to see what it has when it goes live, because this is the type of game that is generally up my alley. I like other games that have this RPG dungeon crawler type of experience to them. If you've seen my top 100 list, you've seen some of these very consistently high on the list, and ones that, well, if you know my backing habits, I'm always interested to check out, which is why I reached out to Mangy Goblin Games to see about covering this, and to see if, well, maybe Edgeguard is going to be the right game for me to back coming up here, or for you. So, what might you need to know that, well, maybe won't work so well for you? One, this is going to be a big dungeon crawl game. Every scenario is going to have different and specific setup to it. I actually liked one thing about my tabletop simulator play, that normally I'm not a huge fan of playing games on tabletop simulator, but there was one thing I liked where I could click end of round and would automatically reset all the resistance for the bad guys. I didn't have to look at the bad guy card and be like, okay, that's what the resistance is. Let me put that back in, keep track of that as I subtract it each time, figure out what it's going to do to health. Instead, it handled that for me. Now, that's not a major complaint with how I play dungeon crawlers. For me, it's such an event of a game that I schedule them out every other week. And with that, it means that, well, my group or myself, or if I'm going to stream something like it live on a Wednesday, I know that I'm going to take the time to set it up. It's intentionally going to be that event sort of game, which is something, I mean, any campaign game, you kind of have to know that about it. What else might people not like as much? I think for some people, the randomness might be a bit high. Now, you don't use a ton of the dice in your standard scenario. A lot of it is very straightforward. And so maybe it's not that the randomness is going to be too high, but you might feel like you're doing the same thing fairly consistently. And that's where those cards really come in. And that is the thing I want to highlight is probably my favorite piece of the game is, well, I see pretty standard traditional dungeon crawler things with very solid writing around them. The card play is a lot of fun. That is something I like a lot in my dungeon crawl games because I pull out a card, it allows me to do something out of the ordinary. And what I'm thinking now is, okay, when do I want to use that card? Do I want to use it now and potentially have to pay to get it back later to be able to use it again? Or do I want to hold on to it for that perfect situation? And for some people, that might be a bit of a struggle because, I mean, if you play a video game RPG, you might be somebody who likes to hoard up everything and not use it because you might need it later. This might not be the best scenario. Same thing happens with pen and paper RPGs. But you have to spend what you have in order to get through some of these scenarios. And that means sometimes you might be spending a card sooner than you expect and have to get it back later, using up resources. But it was the right call when you did it because you don't want to get knocked out. You don't want to get swarmed under. So it's really good card play. You level up, you get more cards, you add that into your collection, and you can really customize your character to what you want to do at that point. This definitely feels like it has DNA that pulls from other dungeon crawl style, RPG style board games. And it does a good job of cherry picking out the really fun pieces. And I mean, it keeps the big bunch of setup going on as well. But that's some of what makes these dungeon crawl campaign games feel so epic. So again, I'm talking about Edgeguard from Mangy Goblin Games, coming to Kickstarter on April 26th. If you're looking for a big box dungeon crawler, this game has a lot of fun in the box and some really good card play that can challenge you to make some tough decisions as you go up against waves of enemies. But thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for Mangy Goblin Games for giving me the Tabletop Simulator mod, access to the rulebook, to be able to play this and preview this for you. I hope that this was interesting information. If you have questions, leave them in the comment section down below. If you enjoy this content, please give the video a thumbs up, subscribe. But with that, I'll see you next time.